You got to spend time with your child's teacher. And don't just ask, how's she doing? You want to know how the teacher views your child. Questions like, what is the potential you see in my child? Do you see anything that could limit that potential? Hello again. Welcome to The Ruthless Truth. I am your host, Truth Davis. In this forum, I share opinions, thoughts, truths on a wide variety of topics based on what I believe to be a unique life experience, which you can read about in the profile or the notes. My intent is to share stories and experiences and hopefully provide some life and career lessons that will assist you on your journey. Please follow me on Instagram at TruthDavis5, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Ruthless Truth, and there's also a Facebook page, Ruthless Truth. The general format, I'll spend the first segment discussing current topics and news. Then I'll pick one topic and go deeper, which will be today's truth. And then I like to finish with an American history fun fact. Okay, we are just 10 weeks away from the U.S. midterm elections. And many people, including myself, believe this will be the most contentious and most engaging midterm election in recent history, if not ever. Record voter turnout is expected, and the campaigns are getting personal and nasty, especially here in Georgia, where Jon Ossoff's seeking re-election against an opponent heavily backed by President Trump, while Keisha Lane Bottoms is seeking to become the first black person elected to governor in the Deep South. And by the way, I do not recognize Florida as part of the Deep South. Okay, so yes, all involved political parties are raising money, debating issues, attacking opponents, and trying to fire up the base. Well, almost everybody. Because it looks like the president doesn't really seem to care that much about the upcoming midterms. His position is that he's not on the ballot, and despite his historically low approval ratings, he believes that voters are mad at the Republican Party, not at him. And with a couple of notable exceptions, he's not actively campaigning or speaking to the issue of affordability, which is unquestionably the number one voter concern. The president just doesn't seem to care that much about the fate of his fellow Republicans on the ballot. So then what does he care about? What is he doing with his time? Well, last week, he conducted a major media event where he explained in detail how he was going to improve the quality and appearance of the driveway at the White House. I mean, he really spent a lot of time on it. The president also continues to tout his various vanity construction projects, including the new White House ballroom, which is now expected to cost more than $1 billion. And oh yeah, just for kicks, over the weekend he started an acrimonious trade war with our closest ally, Canada, slapping 50% tariffs on $20 billion of imported goods. Now, Canada's retaliating with a dollar-to-dollar match of tariffs on the United States imports, resulting in higher prices for consumers in both countries. He's also looking to lower tariffs on imported beef for 90 days, which, oh, what a coincidence, would just about cover the time between now and the midterms. He sees this action as a way to reduce beef prices at the supermarket. However, several Republicans from beef-producing states, as well as the ranchers in these states, said that allowing the discounted foreign beef will undercut U.S. beef prices and financially harm our ranchers and farmers. The president actually said he doesn't care because, quote, this is what I want, end quote. So are we tired of winning yet? You know, in multiple episodes, I've made the point that we are not nearly as divided a nation as the politicians and media would lead you to believe. And that's because both of these groups financially benefit from the divisiveness. So they have a vested interest in keeping us combative. And one of the most prominent tactics is the use of labels. Liberals, conservatives, Democrats, Republicans, socialists, progressives, white nationalists, democratic socialists, and now the newest one getting a lot of airtime is communist, which is hilarious to me for a couple of reasons. First, multiple data sources indicate that less than a third of Americans can accurately define communism. That means for about 70% of the people, yelling communism has limited impact as they don't know what it means in general or specifically to their situation. And then the second reason this is comical to me, communism is so rare, it's practically irrelevant. You know, there are 195 countries in the world. Do you know how many of them are communists? 5. And those 5 are China, Cuba, Laos, North Korea, and Vietnam. And Vietnam's shaky, having embraced many facets of capitalism. But my point is, you'd have to be at least 60 years old for the word communist to mean anything to you. And even then, it doesn't mean much. So here's what you need to do. Ignore the labels. Listen to the values and beliefs expressed by candidates or groups. And finally, listen to the policies and programs they want to implement. For example, I guess from a label standpoint, personally, that makes me a moderate independent. But I believe that in the richest country in the world, healthcare should be available and affordable to everyone. I don't think that's a radical or extremist idea. And here's another one. Currently, the average age of first-time home buyers in the United States is 40 years old. Now, for decades, that number was 30 years old. I believe that adults should have a reasonable path to home ownership before their 35th birthday. That's not crazy. Now, to be clear, there are definitely some radical and extreme ideas floating out there, such as defund the police and eliminating the legislative branch of the government. Those ideas and concepts are insane to me. But if you can dismiss the crazies and look past the labels that are being used to antagonize and manipulate you, you should be able to find the people and groups that are sincerely trying to make things better. And from there, decide who you will support. Now, it takes some effort. But when we're talking about the future of the country, I think it's time well spent. Okay, let's get to today's truth. Today's truth. I'm sure most of you have heard the expression thinking out of the box. But have you ever thought about or considered what the box actually is? You know, from the time you were born, various people and groups have tried to put you in a box. And what is a box? Simply, it's when people assign a label, category, description, or stereotype to you so that they can quickly judge, control, or predict your behavior. Well, in today's truth, I will help you recognize and identify the boxes people are trying to place you in, then equip you with techniques to stay out of the box. Okay, first, let me explain why some boxes can be bad. Now, of course, you can't eliminate all boxes because some are just empirical or demographic. For example, I'm a black man that was born and raised in the South. Now, while this is a box, it's also 100% indisputably true. Now, if someone looks at those demographics and begins to form stereotypes such as seeing me as slower, uncultured, or more prone to emotional outbursts, now they have created an inappropriate and potentially harmful box. And please know it starts early. I mean, we see it as early as preschool, and it continues throughout our educational journey. You know, in episode 7 of The Ruthless Truth, I asserted that we all have biases and we bring them with us to the workplace. Well, this is certainly also true for teachers. Countless studies confirm that many teachers are quick to place students in a box with labels like lazy, disruptive, smart, shy, mischievous, and many others. And the dangers of this are many, but leading outputs are identity. Students may internalize the labels, leading to temporary behaviors becoming fixed parts of their self-identity. Another big one is that it could limit a child's potential. Negative tags like troublemaker cause children to act in ways that match the label, often avoiding challenges or living down to expectations. And positive labels can be detrimental. Labeling a child as athletic may discourage him from pursuing academic challenges or setting high achievement goals. And even praise, such as good kid or genius, places heavy pressure on children, leading to fear of failure and shame when they make mistakes. And if you have black boys, you need to be especially diligent. Labeling and disciplining black boys early in the school system reflects documented patterns of implicit bias and systemic inequality. As evidence, black children make up about 18% of preschool enrollment in the United States, but they account for nearly 48% of preschool suspensions. So, what can you do to help minimize the labeling and boxing of your child? Well, first and foremost, you got to spend time with your child's teacher. And don't just ask, how's she doing? You want to know how the teacher views your child. Questions like, what is the potential you see in my child? Do you see anything that could limit that potential? Because when you get them talking about your child as a person and not just listing their behavior, you'll get a better sense of any potential bias. When my oldest son was in the 4th grade, my wife and I were summoned by the grade counselor to meet with the teaching staff and discuss my son. And at that time, he was attending a predominantly white private school in Atlanta. Now, to be clear, the student population was diverse, but blacks were in the minority. So anyway, the teachers expressed concerns about his behavior. They were like, we noticed during recess sometimes he isn't interacting as much with the other students. And he doesn't behave like everyone else. So I asked them, is he bothering anyone? Is he making any trouble? They're like, no, but we just get a bit concerned when students self-isolate. And I said, you know what? That could just be a black man thinking, okay? And he isn't like everybody else. He knows he's black, and it's not a problem for him, but it seems to be a problem for you. I don't hear this about him from church or when he spends time at the homes of friends. So perhaps you should adjust and customize your approach to how you deal with him. I wasn't going to let them tag him as a problem child before his 10th birthday. Fortunately, by the time my kids reached middle school, we had relocated to Philadelphia and enrolled the boys into a Quaker school, which maintained a positive environment of individualism and a rejection of labels. Best thing ever. Okay, let's move on to adulthood. Now, while labeling and stereotyping are definitely aspects of our personal lives, especially when it comes to dating, today I just want to focus on the impact of your academic or professional life. Now, you must recognize that educational institutions and workplace environments are consistently and adamantly trying to create boxes that they can place everyone in. Why? Because it makes it easier for them to manage and control. They have developed a system, and they want all participants to adhere to the system, because if there are nonconformists, exceptions, or rebellions, then the system owners will have to deal with it, which creates work for them. Now, while this can result in a very efficient and controlling environment, the most egregious aspect of this is that it limits potential. Individualism becomes anathema to conformity. But please know, just about any innovation, achievement, or breakthrough was because somebody rejected the box. Let me give you 3 well-known examples. Bill Gates scored a 1590 out of 1600 on his SAT and enrolled in Harvard. But he dropped out after his sophomore year to start a software development company. Mark Zuckerberg also attended Harvard, and he also dropped out in his sophomore year to launch Facebook. And after attending only one semester at Reed College in Oregon, Steve Jobs dropped out without even telling his parents. He later explained this was because he did not want to spend his parents' money on an education that seemed meaningless to him. Now, obviously, all three of these men went on to achieve iconic greatness. And what's the common element in their stories? They believed their ideas and ambitions were restricted by the structure and box of college. So they broke out to pursue their dreams, unhampered by the conformity of college. Now, don't get me wrong. Working inside the box, coloring between the lines, works really well for a lot of people who can achieve satisfying careers. Do you know the college degrees that have the highest employment rates and salaries? They are, not in any particular order, nursing, engineering, mathematics, and accounting. Now, all of these disciplines are structured with definitive rules. And for some people, this is a very comfortable and satisfying place and career. These people rarely break out of the box and, quite frankly, don't really have a desire to do so. But if you have often been a person who has struggled to conduct yourself appropriately and respectfully in a structured environment, maybe that's not the best place for you. A personal example. I was already working at Verizon Wireless when the CMO asked me to lead the marketing communications team, or MarCom. This is the team responsible for all the advertising, promotional materials, store layouts, websites, anything else to visually promote the brand. And twice I said no. And he wanted to know why. And I just told him, I don't want to be the Marcom guy. Executives and leaderships think of Marcom as being a creative and executional role, and rarely think of it as strategic or operational. You don't get to impact the direction of the business. Now, he understood, and he recognized there was truth to that. But he also reassured me that's not how he would look at me, and that's not how my assignments would fall. But after a couple of years, I began to see that I was indeed being viewed as the Marcom guy. And even though it was the best Marcom job in the country, I had greater ambitions. So I left Verizon Wireless to become the CMO at Comcast. And now I was in the executive leader box. And that's the box I wanted. So, similar to my comments about school children, I encourage you to invest considerable time in determining how you are viewed at work. And if you're in disagreement with how you are perceived and believe it to be inaccurate, make sure people find out what you can do. Have a conversation with your boss. Now, I don't recommend you do this during a performance review, as the stress level is already elevated in that discussion. No, wait until you're having maybe just a regular one-on-one and just ask, hey, what do you see as my potential in the company? And what limitations do you see or perceive that would limit my ability to achieve that potential? Now, if you hear answers that you believe are wrong, well, then just tell them. You say people don't perceive me as being analytical? Well, I totally disagree. So let's work together to identify projects and opportunities where I can demonstrate my analytical skills. I guess my overall message here is that you need to take self-inventory and decide who it is you want to be and what it is you want to do. And just know you probably won't get it right on the first try, but keep at it until you find it. So I'll leave you with just a few points. First, identify and be aware of the labels that people are placing on you. If you disagree or reject them, take action to correct people's flawed perception. Second, determine for yourself what labels you do embrace. Not all labels are bad. I mean, if you pride yourself on being smart and everybody looks at you as smart, then you're on brand. But give some thought about how you want to be viewed and then take steps to reinforce it. This may mean changes, wardrobe choices, and social or leisure activities, or training and mentorship to sharpen the skills and image you want to convey. And finally, practice what you preach. No one likes being stereotyped or labeled. Recognizing this, you should resist doing this to others. They don't like it any more than you do. Okay, let's get to today's American history fun fact. Today's American history fun fact. James Dean was an American movie icon, which is pretty impressive when you consider his career consisted of only 3 film appearances. But what a trio of movies: Rebel Without a Cause, East of Eden, and Giant. And as most people know, his film career was cut tragically short because at the age of 24, he died in a car accident on a California freeway. But as shocking and prominent as this tragedy was, most people have very little understanding on what happened that day. Now, throughout history, there have been many fatal car and plane crashes where we'll never know what actually happened. That's not the case here. So in today's American history fun fact, I'm going to tell you precisely what happened that day, and I'm certain you will learn things you never before knew. Okay, the first thing to know is that James Dean was a racing enthusiast who had competed in several auto races in his early 20s. In March of 1955, he purchased a new Porsche Speedster. Now, just before the beginning of filming for Rebel Without a Cause, Dean competed in a Palm Springs race where he finished first in the novice category and secured second place overall. Now, Dean was scheduled to begin filming Giant in June, wrapping up in mid-September. Well, Warner Brothers were well aware of Dean's passion for racing, and they didn't want any interruption, so they barred Dean from racing during the filming of Giant. So on September 21st, 1955, James Dean purchased a new Porsche 550 Spyder with intent to race it October 1st and 2nd. So on September 30th, 1955, James Dean and his Porsche factory trained mechanic Rolf planned to drive from Los Angeles to Salinas, which is about a 300-mile drive. Now, Dean originally had planned to tow the Porsche, but realized the car had not logged enough miles to qualify for the race on October 1st. So the two men set out in the new Porsche 550 together. Now, they would be trailed by Dean's good friend Bill Hickman, who was a Hollywood stuntman and was driving James Dean's station wagon and the attached trailer. However, with approximately 60 miles left in the trip, James Dean sped away, leaving Hickman and the station wagon miles behind. At approximately 5:55 p.m. on September 30th, 1955, 23-year-old Navy veteran Donald Turnipseed was driving his two-tone 1954 Tudor and turned onto State Road 41, headed to Fresno. Turnipseed later testified that he never saw the Porsche coming near him. Now, James Dean was speeding toward him when he saw that Turnipseed had crossed the center line, attempting to turn left onto Highway 41 in front of the oncoming Porsche. Seeing that a crash was imminent, Dean tried to steer the Spyder in a sidestepping racing maneuver, but with insufficient time and space, the two cars collided almost head-on in a horrific crash. Witnesses reported that the Spyder smashed into the ground 2 or 3 times in cartwheels and landed in a gully beside the shoulder of the road northwest of the junction. The velocity of the impact sent the much heavier Ford broad sliding 39 feet down US 466 into the opposing lane. Okay, let me pause here and note a couple of points that most people don't know. First, James Dean was not alone in the car at the time of his fatal crash. As I mentioned, his mechanic was riding with him. Now, there have been some salacious reports about the potential relationship between Dean and his passenger, but most credible accounts say their relationship was purely professional. Second, many people had the perception that the accident occurred on some deserted highway. Not at all. This was 6 p.m. on a busy highway. There were several witnesses to the crash, including the 2 survivors, Turnipseed and Vutrick. Okay, in the aftermath of the crash, responders were focused on extricating James Dean from the wreckage. Vutrick had been thrown clear. Approximately 10 minutes after the collision, Bill Hickman drove upon the scene and helped finally get Dean out of the wreckage and into an ambulance. Dean was pronounced dead on arrival at 6:20 p.m. by the attending emergency room physician. The cause of death is listed as a broken neck, multiple fractures of the upper and lower jaw, both arms broken, and internal injuries. James Dean actually died in the arms of his friend Bill Hickman. As to Turnipseed, he was not seriously injured, sustaining only facial bruises and a bloody nose. He didn't even receive medical attention and actually hitchhiked home from the accident scene. So what was the crash aftermath? Well, first, news was slow in those days. So although the accident occurred on Friday, September 30th, 1955, most of the world did not learn of it until Monday, October 3rd. Now, there was a criminal inquiry, and it was determined that no crime had been committed, and it was simply a traffic accident. Soon after his death, Rebel Without a Cause and Giant were released, and James Dean became the first actor to receive a posthumous Best Actor Oscar nomination. Donald Turnipseed died in 1995 at the age of 63, but only gave one interview about the crash in his entire life, despite being sought by media outlets every September 30th for years. And Rolf Wuttritz, as a result of the crash, he developed severe psychological problems. He reportedly suffered from bouts of depression, suicidal tendencies, and subsequently became an alcoholic. On July 22nd, an intoxicated Wuttritz was killed when he lost control of his Honda Civic and crashed into a wall. And like James Dean, Wuttritz had to be cut from the wreck and was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 53 years old. This accident was truly a tragedy in which James Dean was the only fatality. But now you know what really happened. Okay, that's all I have for you today on The Ruthless Truth. Thank you so much for listening. Again, follow me on Instagram at TruthDavis5. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, Ruthless Truth. There's also a Facebook page, Ruthless Truth. And I encourage and invite all of you to look at past episodes. They cover a wide range of topics. I'm sure you will find something of interest to you. So, again, thanks for listening, and I will talk to all of you again soon.